Hi, I'm bringing you another sheet pan winner that we're making today. This is a veggie frittata, and it cooks up quickly, and it can feed a crowd, or it can just feed you and your family for most of the week. Hi, I'm Judy Matesky. I'm a registered dietitian with Athens Nutrition, as well as a culinary nutritionist. So I'm back with another sheet pan dinner that I made one last week. Like I said, I'm not always a big fan sometimes of everything cooked on a sheet pan, but this last week and this one are two winners that I make a lot. So we're going to go ahead and get started pretty quickly. I want to get through this with you. My name is Judy Matesky, and I'm a registered dietitian with Athens Nutrition, as well as a culinary nutritionist. And I am always creating and finding recipes with your health in mind. So we're trying to keep things simple and easy, but also certainly healthy and delicious. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a two-step process, and just for time purposes, I already did step one. I'll just try to walk you through that real quickly. So basically, on this sheet pan, I have roasted a bunch of vegetables ahead of time. If you've roasted vegetables before, it's exactly the same process the way you would do it for this recipe. 400-degree oven. These veggies were in there for about 20 minutes, and that's all they needed to get a little bit browned and a little bit softened. Now, the recipe is on our blog, and I'll post it on in the comment section on our Facebook page as well. But what I love about frittatas is that they're so easy to put together, and you're using things that you might throw away, that are in your fridge. So that's what I love about them. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I want to get started because the first process was roasting those vegetables, and I've already done that for you, so they're ready to go. Now I want to just go ahead and get to the eggs so I can put this back in the oven so it can finish up before we finish. So the recipe, I found this recipe on in a cookbook called Downshiftology, and it was a great recipe, only I made quite a few modifications to it, so it's not really the original recipe. What I did change a little bit with the amount of eggs. So one thing, keeping in mind that you want a sheet pan that has a decent side to it. So you want some depth to your sheet pan because you need to hold these eggs. And I like using a parchment lined sheet pan just to help, so when you put the eggs in with the vegetables, that they just end up not sticking when you're trying to cut them and get them out of your sheet pan. So I'm using, I think, a dozen eggs. I've made this with only 8 eggs. You can make this really with probably the fewest amount of eggs would be 8, and then anywhere up to 14. It's just going to make the frittata thicker. That's all. And it might just take a little bit longer or a little bit less to cook in the oven. The last time I made it with 8 eggs, and it was fine. It was just a little on the thinner side. So today I'm going to make it with 12, and I already have some eggs already out of their shell and in the bowl. So I just have 2 more that we're gonna add, and then we're just this is pretty simple. And again, the great thing about the frittata is that it's almost like, it's sort of like, you could almost call it like a garbage frittata, because I feel like frittatas are so great to make at the end of the week when you have a lot of things left over, whether it's like little nubs of cheese, or you've got like vegetables that maybe you've already roasted and need to use them up, or fresh vegetables that you didn't make during the week. So that's what I love about them. And you may already make frittatas. I used to always just make them in a baking dish, but I love this idea of putting them on a sheet pan because it's even faster and it's easier, and it makes a lot more. All right, so we have 12 eggs in here, and I'm just going to beat these up. Going to add, it's about a teaspoon of salt, give or take. It's up to you. Again, you can hold off on that if you want to. And then some fresh ground pepper. And, a couple turns. I love a lot of pepper, so I usually put a little bit more. And because I have a lot of extra herbs, and we're going to do just a little bonus recipe while these eggs are cooking, I had a lot of chives in my refrigerator. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of chop these up a little bit so that we can add some herbs. This is great. We're going to make a little herby sauce to put on this at the end. But if you have extra herbs in the refrigerator, by all means, add them. You can add them right to the eggs now before they bake, and then you can save some to put on top. So I'm going to and again, amounts, other than the amount of eggs, I guess, depending on that, which that doesn't even really matter. What's great about this is that it doesn't, the amounts that you were adding as far as the ingredients It's really up to you. The recipe gives you a guideline for the amount that you might use to fill up, but the whole idea is you just want enough veggies that it's going to fill up your sheet pan. And I think the recipe says that when you roast your vegetables, you can add them back to the eggs and then, pour them back onto the sheet pan. I think you only need to do that if you were roasting your vegetables on a sheet pan and you were not using parchment paper. Then I would take the vegetables off, add them to the eggs, stir them around, and then I would respray your baking sheet so that they just don't stick, because the eggs will if you don't really have that well coated. So that's the only time. I think just for ease, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and pour these eggs right into the veggies and the sheet pan, and didn't get that yolk. All right. And then the whole idea here is we're just trying to level this out a little bit so that the eggs aren't so that they sort of flow throughout the whole sheet pan. All right, so just, you can take your spatula and just kind of move the eggs around a little bit just so that they spread out and all of your veggies are sort of, tucked in with the eggs. Now, the recipe also calls for adding some feta cheese, which would be about 1/4 cup or so of feta cheese. You could add that directly to the eggs as you're making that egg mixture, and then the feta cheese will kind of melt into the eggs while it bakes, which is, I like it that way better than adding it after it comes out of the oven. I'm just holding off on the eggs because my daughter-in-law is coming to visit, and she right now I'm going to hold off on the feta cheese because she can't really have dairy right now. So I am not going to add the feta cheese. So I'm just going to do this without. This is going back in the oven. Now with this, we set the oven at 400 to roast the vegetables. That was about 20 minutes. Take them out, get your eggs ready, pour the eggs on top of that sheet pan, but then turn the oven down to 350. So my oven's already set at 350, and they're only going to take about 15 minutes. So we'll keep checking on them because you don't want to go, you want them just set, and they might seem even a little soft, but they'll be ready to come out because they're going to continue to cook a little bit on that sheet pan, the eggs will, and you just don't want those eggs to get too dry. All right, so those are in. Let me just set my timer. I'm going to actually set it for 14 minutes. All right. So while this is baking, I thought, well, because I want to really show you the finished product so you can kind of see what they look like, and then I'll talk about storage with them and how we're going to cut them up and different ways you can use the leftovers. But because I always have a lot of fresh herbs in my refrigerator at all times, and I'm really hoping that you are doing the same, and if not, please consider doing that, because fresh herbs just can transform a dish. Everything tastes better with fresh herbs, whether you're adding it to the recipe and cooking the herbs in it, or whether you're just adding it or adding it at the end. It can just make such a difference. They're great on everything, in my opinion. And this week, like I said, I almost always have parsley in my refrigerator. That's just an easy go-to that I always have. The chives looked so great. The fresh chives looked fantastic at the market, so I grabbed them this week, and I've been just sort of chopping them and using them on a lot of different dishes. So I have a pretty decent amount of herbs. So I thought we'd just make like an herby sauce to go over this frittata when it's finished up. And to make that, we're just using, again, whatever herbs you have. You want the tender, sort of the tender fresh herbs. So this is something that would be a little harder to do with like a rosemary, or even like, sage. Those are a little bit stronger, heartier herbs. This is more our parsley, chive, dill, cilantro, those types of herbs. So whatever you have, they all go together. I had some mint last week, and I made a similar sauce last week with the mint in with the parsley. I don't have mint this week, so I'm just going to use the chives and the parsley. You could just use parsley or just use any herb you have. The recipe is sort of based on like a chimichurri, which is a parsley-based olive oil garlic kind of sauce. I'm just calling this an herby sauce because we're kind of straying a little bit from that. But basically, it's just the herbs, some fresh garlic, some red wine vinegar, and the red wine vinegar is, I think, really important. I've tried it with other vinegars. I just think the red wine vinegar is just, to me, the best for this flavor. And then a little salt, a little olive oil. It's really simple. And again, this is a great recipe because it doesn't necessarily need to follow exact measurements. I never do when I make it. I just am chopping, throwing things together, and it seems to always taste really good. So I am probably going to do about the same thing, but I do have a chimichurri recipe on our blog, so at judymatusky.com. You can certainly look it up if you want the exact measurements, but like I said, I typically don't. So I already have, I usually do anywhere between 2 to 4 garlic cloves. It really just depends on how garlicky you want this sauce to be. But the key with making this is that you definitely want, I have some part in the back of this, some garlic that I shredded, that you really want this minced. So I don't even chop it, because chopping it, I can't get it fine enough. For a sauce like this, you really want to use a microplane. And my sister-in-law gave me this. I love it because you can actually sit it right on the bowl, and then you can use it and just sort of run your garlic over top. So I'm just going to take the paper off of the garlic, and for this, you just kind of smash your garlic to take it off. You don't really want to smash it too hard, because if you do, then the garlic, I'm gonna have to hit it a little harder, because then the garlic just kind of smashes and it makes it a little bit harder to use on the microplane. So, oh gosh, I'm really struggling here with this. All right, this is a really big clove. My garlic cloves are really big this time. I'm not exactly sure why. But normally, when you smash your garlic a little bit harder, the skin, the paper skin comes off really easily. So let me just toss this real quick. And then you're just going to run it across the microplane. So like I did with the other, this is the third one. This is actually going to be pretty garlicky because my garlic cloves are pretty big. So I probably could have just gotten away with this too. I might only use half of this, but all right. So that looks good. I'll just do half. All right. And then with your finger or whatever, a spoon, you can just take off the little bit of the garlic that's at the bottom. All right. So we have that. And the next step is going to be to just chop our herbs. So when you're chopping herbs, you just really want them to kind of come together. You just make like a little bundle with them, as tight as you can, kind of wrap them up, so that it just makes it easier and faster to chop them. So I really kind of fold everything together and make a nice little bundle. Move that out of the way, and then, fingers out of the way, obviously. I'm just going to chop this up. Remember, herbs are considered a dark leafy green, right? So we're all supposed to be eating a lot more dark leafy greens. This is one way to get them. And, as I've said many times before, I think it's important to think about your herbs almost like a veggie, that don't just do a little sprinkle on top just for garnish. I mean, really load them up, put them in, put a lot in. If it calls for a quarter of a cup in a recipe, use a half a cup. Especially some of these more mild herbs, because it's really hard to overdo it, at least in my opinion. All right, so we're going to grab the parsley. And as I mentioned, where I live, I usually go to a local market. It's called Gentili's, which isn't far from me. And probably my favorite thing about Gentili's is that their herbs are gorgeous. So my husband is a great gardener, as you know, and he grows a lot of herbs. We can get our hardy herbs in the winter, so I'm still getting some oregano and some rosemary and some thyme, but they're really struggling a little bit, but we kind of get them through the winter as best we can. But certainly all of these, more tender, fresher herbs they're annuals, so we plant them every year. So we don't have these yet, but we will, although my husband does have a hydroponic gardening system up in the greenhouse, and he's been getting some lettuce and some parsley and some dill this winter, so that has been kind of fun to have it without having to always buy it. But right now we're kind of in between seasons a little bit, so These are from my market, my favorite market, and I just love their herbs because they usually do have great herbs. All right, so I don't know, give or take half a cup. I mean, I have more parsley here. I could always add more. So and then that's something to keep in mind. So when you're making a sauce like this, you could start with a certain amount of herbs, and then we're going to add olive oil. So let's just do that right now. It's about a half a cup. Again, I don't measure it. You're kind of just enough to sort of cover it a little bit. It doesn't have to be real thinned out with the olive oil. It depends on how you want your sauce. If you want it to be a little thinner, then you would want to use a little more olive oil. If not, a little more pasty, you don't have to use quite as much. It's up to you. And it's about, I guess, 2 or 3 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. And then you do need some decent amount of salt because this is a sauce. Now remember, so we're using maybe half of a teaspoon to a teaspoon in this, and a little bit of cracked pepper. It's a sauce, so it's going to add, you know, significant flavor to whatever you're using. So a little bit goes a long way. And then we're just going to, let's just stir this around. All right, so you can see that I probably added maybe, I want to say maybe a quarter of a cup of olive oil. So I'm going to use a little bit more because I want it to, this isn't quite, you know, I want it to be a little more saucy than this. But you could stop here if you wanted to, that's fine. And because I want it to be I want a little bit of heat this time from this herby sauce because I think it would be great with the eggs. I am going to use a few sprinkles of some red pepper flakes in here. All right, and then now let's just take a little more olive oil, just drizzle it on. All right. And what I was beginning to say that I got sidetracked. So when you're making a sauce like this, what I'll often do, because if you keep it, if it's pretty well, you know, coated, if all these herbs are well coated with the oil or even like submerged a little bit in the oil, and it smells so good. It's just amazing. This flavor combination just is fabulous. So what I'll often do, so if I have extra herbs, so I might make this amount for now, but then because I have the extra herbs, as I start to use this up, I'll put this in a jar with a lid. As I start to use this up, I might just chop some more fresh herbs, add them back in, maybe a little bit more olive oil, and I almost kind of keep it going in my fridge. I don't know how long it lasts, but it lasts a long time. I have it in my fridge for quite a while, and we keep using it on eggs, on fish, on chicken. Sometimes I'll top a grain bowl with it. Whenever I need something, and I need to like give something a little bit more pizzazz, I often will grab this kind of a sauce. I'm chopping up these extra chives because I think I want to put those on we'll sprinkle those up on top of the frittata. Okay. All right, so this is it for our herb sauce. I think that's really good to go. I'm going to set this aside, and then let's just take a peek at our eggs because we don't want them to overcook. So let me pull this out. So these are, I just want to show it to you right now. So you can see that it's starting to set. I'm going to turn it because the back of my oven is a little hotter than the front part of my oven. So it's already setting. So I'd say it's only going to need a few more minutes. Because remember, like I said, that the eggs are going to continue to cook as you take them out and as they sit on the sheet pan. And you just don't want them to be too dry. I feel like the moisture from the vegetables kind of help to keep it from the eggs from getting dry, which is kind of nice. So again, with frittatas, just use whatever veggies you have. I happen to use today, I used Brussels sprouts because I had a few left over because I had made some earlier in the week, and I didn't have enough room on my sheet tray when I was making them to roast them. So I had some Brussels sprouts. I just quartered them. I used a whole container of red cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes. You don't have to cut them in half. I just threw them right in whole. I had a little bit of broccoli left over, so I cut them up in some, bite-sized florets, on the smaller side so that they would get a little bit tender in a shorter amount of time. And I also used I had the orange bell pepper, so I cut that into strips. And I had, I was going to show you this. Let me have a few more minutes. I had, I can find it, yeah. When I went to the Gentiles, I thought this was kind of fun because we're getting into spring soon, hopefully sooner than later, and they had spring onions. So this is a spring onion, all right? And I had to look up what the difference was, differences between scallions, spring onions, and onions. And basically, they're all the same. So the scallion is before the bulb begins to form. The spring onions have been in the ground, and then the bulb starts to form. But it's not a huge one yet. It's milder than a regular onion. The green part of a spring onion is a little bit stronger flavor than the green part of a scallion. So the scallions are the most mild. This one's gonna have a little bit more bite to it. And then if you leave this in the ground, you're gonna get a regular onion. So right now is the time you're gonna start to see spring onions in the market, and grab them because they are really good. Because they're a little bit stronger than scallions, I tend to use these. I kind of roast them or cook them. So I had 2 of these. So I cut them in, decent sized thickness as far as the bulb, and then into the, maybe about a half an inch to an inch as I went up the stalk. And I roasted them on the sheet tray because they're just so good. So if you have scallions, great. If you have purple onions, great. If you have regular onions, great. You can add them to the sheet tray. But I really love the idea of adding onions because it adds a really nice caramelized, you get that little caramelized flavor from the onion. You could do some garlic on this. I just didn't think I wanted that. Sometimes I feel like garlic can overpower eggs a little bit. So we're gonna use the chives as the fresh herb, which we already added to the eggs. I'll sprinkle some on top. And then because we used the scallions, I feel like that gave it enough allium kind of flavor. All right, so this is ready to, I think, pretty close, if not ready to come out. Let's just take a peek. Yeah, that looks good. All right, let me just turn this off. All right, so as you can see, it is set. You can see that. Now I could have probably mixed the eggs a little bit better because you can see that we have some whites that really separated out as they bake, but that's fine. So here we go. Now, what you're going to want to do with this, since it makes a lot, if you would do 2 eggs per person as a serving, then we're saying 6 servings. But I really think you can almost get 12 servings out of this, depending on how big you want that serving size to be. So what I usually do is I will usually, get a glass container or a storage container. I probably would need a bigger one than this, but basically, as you're cutting this, you can cut it down, you can cut it lengthwise, and then cut it across. And like I said, you could do 6 to 12 slices out of this. And this is a great dinner, it's a great lunch, it's a great breakfast. Whatever's left over, then what I'll do is I'll usually stack them in a container like this. So I'll lay one in, I'll put like a little square of wax paper or parchment paper on top, then I'll layer another one, then more wax paper or parchment and layer it. So they just don't stick together. And then pop this in your fridge, pop them in your fridge, and then you'll have them all week. So to warm them up, just in the microwave for 30 seconds, maybe to a minute. What I love to do with this is we'll have this tonight for dinner. I'll serve it with a nice big salad and probably some toast, some good toasted whole grain bread, making it almost a breakfast for dinner kind of thing. And then in the morning, we might warm it up and just have it just as is with a little hot sauce maybe. And then for lunch, what I'll do is I'll either put it on top of a salad, or you can add, the original recipe called for some spinach or arugula. You would add that into the eggs and then bake it, and then you could top it with some more greens on top if you had fresh arugula or fresh spinach. I only had lettuce right now, so I didn't use that, which would be great. You could just make some toast, put this on top of the toast. You could turn it into a sandwich. You could turn it into a wrap. So it's so versatile. That's what I love about it. So when I go to serve this, what I'm going to do is take it, and with the sauce tonight, I'll probably just reheat it a little bit in the microwave per serving. And then I'm going to take some of this herby sauce that we just made, and then I'm just going to dollop a little bit of that on top. You could sprinkle feta cheese on top, Parmesan cheese on top. If you're not doing dairy or cheese, you could use nutritional yeast as a replacement. So that's what's so great about frittatas. They're so versatile. You can definitely, dress them up, dress them down, but also add and mix and match whatever, you kind of have in your fridge. So I hope you give this a try, and let me know if you do, because I love it. You guys are being great about putting some comments in and let me know how things go. Next week we'll be back again, and you stay well. Remember, cooking is a powerful health behavior, and we all want you cooking the way you want to feel. And I think as we're eating more vegetables, more plant-based, a little bit lighter, but keeping it simple, and so that you're not overwhelmed in the kitchen, I think is key. All right, stay well till next week, and I will see you then.